Mike McCool here in the Royal Examiner studio, and with me today is local author Will Gray. Will has written this book. Mark's going to zoom in here on the cover. This is really I talked to him earlier, I called it historical fiction, so he's going to correct me on it and tell me what it's really all about. But there's some truth in a lot of this book right here. And on the cover it says, a page-turning psychological thriller.
Absolutely, yes.
There you go. So why don't you give us a little history about the man behind the door? Is that what it is?
Yep.
Okay.
So The Man Behind the Door came to fruition about December 17th, 2018 was the 10th anniversary of my father's death, and that was a really huge focus on the story. I really didn't set out to write a book to put it out into the world. I wanted to tell his story in its entirety from beginning to end as best as I could with what I knew. And so I feel like he's kind of the villain of the story in a lot of people's eyes because of the things he struggled with and the things that he did. And he didn't just wake up one day and become necessarily a bad man. He had some childhood trauma, and that led to some problems into adulthood, and then some physical ailments led to addiction. And so when he committed suicide, I was angry for a long time. Over the course of the last couple of years, I've really changed that mindset. And so in 2018, I was sitting there and I was struggling a lot that year, and I said, I'm going to put pen to page, rather type to page, because word processors are the way to go now. But I decided to kind of tell his story. And like I said, I didn't intend it to be a full novel, and especially something I put out in the world. It was just for me. But it all came together so easily. And there's a lot of fiction to it too, but a lot of the things that happened to Lee Glasscock in this book are things that my father struggled with in some way, shape, or form. So that was the big motivation behind it. And the fiction part is, I've got a great one-sentence spiel for it, which is The Man Behind the Door is a psychological thriller that focuses on grief, trauma, and addiction with a ghost story spin. So the ghost story stuff is where the fiction really comes in.
Well, people love a good ghost story.
That's right, absolutely.
Let me look at your book here. So does the fire on the cover have anything to do with the story?
So something occurs in the story that correlates with the cover.
Now, don't give it all away too much.
Absolutely.
We want you to read this book.
Absolutely. There is a fire in the story. Nothing in real life that inspired that. That's part of the fiction part. But that was where that's in the climax, and so you guys can read it and find out all that happens. But it's a pretty wild ride. I'm really proud of what I did with it. And so even with the fiction, I find that there's a lot of truth in the fiction that I wrote, because a lot of the characters' emotions and the things that they struggle with are things directly inspired by my life, whether it's my direct path or the path that I know I could have gone down. And so that was a lot of fun to write too, kind of just to play the devil's advocate and the duality of it and just really explore all the different avenues.
Right. Will is going to be at the Royal Oak Bookstore. Did you say the 26th, correct?
Yep, November the 26th.
November the 26th from noon to 4.
That's it.
If you've never been to the Royal Oak Bookshop, you really need to go there, because they have got a little bit of everything in there. And they do bring in local authors to come and do a book signing and show up and talk to people. It's great. Tammy over there is, the cats and stuff will be running around.
Yeah.
It's great. But it's cool. And so Will is a local author. Where do you live at, Will?
So currently I live in Martinsburg, so less than an hour away.
Right.
But a good portion of the book takes place in Linden. That is where I lived when my father committed suicide.
Okay.
And I lived there for a little bit longer after that.
Okay.
But so a good portion of the book takes place in Linden, and the actual end of the book takes place there in Linden too. So so a little bit of locality with it, some local geography. And while there's I tweaked the address of the house a little bit, of course, to keep it a secret, so anybody living there might
There's people
not
who
be
show
harassed.
up. Yeah.
But I tweaked it a little bit. But the way I describe the house, it 100% exists, and there's just a little bit of reference of local geography, Warren County, that kind of deal. So pretty exciting for anyone in the area.
Yeah, people like when they're reading to say, "Oh, I know where that is." They'll get in their car and drive over there and take a look.
I'm a pharmacy technician at a local pharmacy in Winchester, and I've had a couple people buy my book and then come back and be like, "I lived in Warren County," or "I live in Warren County," so it was really cool to see the correlation there.
Yeah. Well, they say everyone has a book inside them.
Yeah.
And you've taken an event in your life, and this thing just kind of, like you say, started out as a venting process.
Absolutely.
And next thing you know, it grew into How many pages there? There's a lot of
It's
them in
300 and 340, I think,
300.
something around there. It depends on the print. So the Kindle version is different.
Yeah.
I had a hardcover floating around, which I don't feel like the hardcover quality was there with Amazon,
Right.
but I ended up settling on the paperback, and I love how it looks and how it turned out. But yeah, 340 something pages,
Isn't that
335.
something? And you finally, when you kept writing, you finally get you come up with an ending.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I love talking about the process because it's different for everybody. Writing is an adventure, and everybody has a different way of going about it. But I really like a laissez-faire, hands-off as far as outlining. Like I like to have a rough idea where I'm going, but I like the story to tell itself a little bit. And a lot of times I'll be writing and something will occur to me and it's exactly where I needed it to go and what I wanted. And sometimes it changes the whole thing.
Well, yeah, your subconscious is always working, and they'll bring up memories that you've done buried, and things come forward. You say, "Oh, yeah, I guess that." When you're writing about it, kind of in the friction stage, in the fiction stage, then the friction comes out.
Yeah,
100%. And oh, maybe that did really happen, and here I've just suppressed it, and it's come out in your writing, and then when you go back and talk to people and you find out. How about, do you have brothers, sisters?
I have two older brothers. They're twins, half brothers. We don't share the same father. They're 20 years older than me, so they're quite a bit older.
That's like a whole other generation.
I know, big disconnect there. But yeah, they were around during that time too. But I don't actually feature them in the story, and the mother featured in the story is fictional too. My mother struggled with illness, which I referenced in that book, and I gave the mother character in the book illness as well, but not a direct reference. Really, the only true real life person in there is Lee Glasscock, is my father, Michael Gray.
Right. So now tell us a little bit about, is there in your book, because I have not read it yet, but I like talking about books.
Absolutely.
And you'll see my library. I do like reading books, and a lot of times there's always an underlying message when people do. As this thing progressed, other people are going to have this experience in their life. And again, writing for you, it was a relief. It's kind of put a whole new perspective on your father.
100%. Yeah, I feel entirely different about him now than I did when I started, for sure. By the time I got to the end of it, and there's one scene near the end. I edited it like 8 or 9 times, and every single time I read it, it emotionally wrecked me. And that's how I knew I was honest with it too, because I told it as truly as I could, and to have that cathartic feeling, because it's not anything that happened. It's just kind of wishful thinking almost.
Sure.
And so it was a really hard thing to read and read again, but to still have that reaction at the end was really palpable. It made me feel like I made something worthwhile. But I think the underlying message is that really 2 things. We don't know the full story. There's 2 sides to every story, and people do despicable things all the time. Good people do bad things, and bad people do good things. And more often than not, it's not as cut and dry as that even. So as people, we kind of have both sides to ourselves. And that's really what I wanted to explore with the Lee Glasscock character. I wanted to tell my dad's story through this fictional lens and keep a lot of the real life stuff in there, but I wanted it to be a situation where someone reads it and they say, Lee Glasscock does some pretty despicable and horrific things, but he's still the most likable character. And I actually had a review come back to me from a podcaster, and he said those exact things, and that really touched me, because that's what I set out to do, because it deals with a lot of tough subjects, trauma and addiction, grief, and I tried to come at it as compassionately as possible, because it's a really important subject. They're very relevant to today's day, and I wanted it to come off as nicely and understanding as possible, because everybody has somebody that's dealing with one of those things.
Exactly. One of the really easiest ways I tell people to write a book is you have this basic thing in your brain already, and to sit down and talk to somebody, just ask you a couple questions and let you talk, record that, transcribe it, and that gives you kind of like you always see it on television. Chapter 1, they write and they sit there and look at it.
Yeah,
right? That's not the way to write a book.
100%. Yeah, absolutely. I every time that I sit down to write, I usually already have like a rough idea of where I'm going to go with it, or I've had such strong inspiration. And I actually have a second book that's coming out in the next.
I'm going to ask you about that. Everyone has a second book too.
I actually signed a traditional publishing contract with a small new publishing house, and it's much more of a niche genre book than this. It's more of a Stephen King-esque book than this one is.
Sure.
And I don't know if I'll ever write another book that's strictly like that again. It was fun to write something that's more genre fiction horror style, but
Sure.
I prefer stuff that kind of is elevated above being genre fiction. I like
Right.
books that have elements of my favorite authors and favorite like parts of books in it, favorite genre pieces, but I like things that really tackle hard subjects and elevate itself above being a scary book or like
Right.
a sad but feel good book. Usually my favorite books that always make it to the top of my list are books that are just surprising in the way that they handle things so well and in difficult ways.
You don't want your family and friends to read this say, Will, I didn't know you were such a creepy guy.
I know.
A scary guy. What? Maybe we need to.
I know. I haven't had too many people say something like that. I had one person saying like, "I can't believe you have such a wild imagination. I would have
Yeah.
never imagined that you could do this and
Sure.
be so successful with it."
Yeah.
And like I said, I've had a lot of people come back and say such wonderful things, and I try not to let it go to my head, and I take it with a grain of salt too,
Sure,
because
sure.
a lot of them are familiar faces. But I've been really fortunate, and I'm beyond excited that I got a traditional publishing contract.
Sure.
And it's kind of validating. And so I'm excited to see where the journey takes me because
great.
I have more books ahead for sure.
Well, sure. Everyone's got some. It's when you have to write a book and you got that deadline.
Yeah.
That makes it tough. But how did COVID work for you? Did you get a little time sitting around to write, or?
So I started this book in 2018, and this book was easy to write. And I hate saying it like that because emotionally it was really difficult, but it was a passion project. COVID wasn't around yet, but basically I got off work every single day. I went home for 3 or 4 hours and I plugged away at it, and I completed a first draft in like 35, 40 days.
Wow. Yeah.
But that's all I did. I didn't see anybody else. I didn't spend time with friends or family. It was like it was a compulsive need to get it out.
Yeah.
And my second book was not at all like that. It took me a long time to finish it, and I actually pretty much finished it before COVID happened. But I didn't have a lot of luck with querying with editors and agents because it's hard to break through when you get to my age. I'm turning 29 in a couple months, and I don't have any notoriety within the business. I've never published anything before. I didn't take the time to really pursue it as a young person like I really wanted to. And so I just couldn't get off the ground because it's such a competitive game now.
Yeah,
for
they
it.
say there's 500,000 books written a year or something like that.
Absolutely. And so I didn't do anything with it for a very long time. I let it sit, and I kind of just accepted the fact that I had a blast writing 2 books. One of them
Sure.
was a really good experience emotionally for me. But I didn't really imagine I was going to end up putting it out in the world. And then eventually what ended up happening was my fiance read it. And she read it in one night.
And she's still your fiance, right?
She's still my fiance. She read it in one night. She works overnights as a CNA, and she read it in one night. I sent her my very rough draft. And I sent it to her in like an EPUB format to read on her phone, and she read it in one night. She came home, she had 100 pages left. She'd been up for like 20 hours. She stayed up after she got home to finish those last little bit of pages.
Wow.
And
She was glued to it, wasn't
she was glued to it, and she loves to tell people. She's like, I didn't like to read before I read Will's book, and now she reads regularly because it just changed her opinion. Because unfortunately, I think a lot of people that don't like to read have just never read the books that are right for them.
Exactly.
And so that was really a motivation for me. She gave me a lot of confidence because I hadn't had anyone previously that read my book and that believed in it so much. I've had friends that read it and they were like, "Oh, it was really good,
really good, yeah,
really good."
That's the last you hear about it, right?
Exactly. I had a friend, say, "Man, I want to give you a hug. That's really rough." But it was like pulling tooth and nails to get some people in my life before to read it.
Yeah.
And, that really affected me negatively. But she devoured it in one night, and she was like, I need you to finish your other one and get it to me. I'm so excited for it. And so I started querying again, and I couldn't get anywhere. And so I said, you know what? If no one is going to publish my book, I'm going to publish it myself. So I did the research. I spent countless hours doing editing and formatting and cover design, and I put it out in the world on my own via Amazon.
Right.
And it was a learning process. I ended up doing another round of editing after I initially published and changing the cover a little bit to make it look nicer after I got the first 10 copies out into the world. Because it was a lot. And I still am learning to this day about the whole self-publishing process.
Amazon really has opened up the publishing world.
Oh, yeah,
and self-publishing is really a good way to do it because, like you say, and that's probably why you got your publisher, because they look at that and said, oh, wow, you sold books.
Absolutely.
And so they'll look at people and say, if you can sell this by yourself, then we know we can sell it.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what it is. It's a great tool. And editing is another trick.
Yeah.
Every publisher needs our author needs an editor.
Absolutely.
And to self-edit, it's hard.
And so I did like 7 or 8 rounds of editing before I published for the first time. One of the first copies I sold was to this gentleman at work, and he's a dear friend of mine. He's an older guy. He was just so kind all the time. We always chatted. He came back to me. He goes, "Will, your book is fantastic. You need to do another round of editing." And I said, "Okay." And he's like, "I was an English teacher back before I retired." He's like, "I would recommend you to read it out loud and read it slow.
Yep.
And you'll be surprised by the end product you get."
Yep.
And I was floored. I mean, it completely changed the whole process.
Right.
It took way longer to do it that way, but the end product, I've had people read it and they say, "I think you paid for an editor," but then they'll say like, and then at the same time they'll read another part and say, "But I'm not sure because it's not necessarily a grammar thing. It's a style or a concision thing.
Right.
It's this phrase could have been a little bit more concise, or you could have avoided this cliche if you'd paid someone to look at it." And so technically, it's all there. Like the grammar and the punctuation sounds like it's all there. Nobody has found anything since I've done that. And I challenge anyone too, because I would love to be able to fix it.
Sure.
But
that's true. Is reading it out loud, and I tell that when we're doing scripts and books on tapes and things when we record them. I said, never start at page 1. Just open the book up to page 6 or chapter 6 and start proofing there, and then go back and go back and forth and do it a chapter at a time, and not try to just start at the beginning, because next thing you know, it'll change the whole flavor of your book when you do that.
And that's actually a good idea too. I never thought about that, because also when you read it linearly, it's easier to get caught up in the story too.
Exactly.
And my story, there's 3 different storylines, so there's a little bit of jumping around. I've had a couple people come back and say I had to keep characterless, but it was really fantastic.
that shows they were engaged.
Absolutely. And so, but that's the kind of book I like to read. I like to read where it all comes together near the end, and you don't necessarily know everything that's going on, and it's kind of a big question mark.
Sure.
Because if I have all the information to begin with, I almost don't want to read the book sometimes.
Right.
So,
well, it's great. So I think we've enticed enough people to come to November 26th at the Royal Oak Bookshop and meet you.
Absolutely.
Buy your book. If you can't make it there, go on Amazon and look for Will F. Gray.
Yep.
And it's called The Man Behind the Door. Will, I really appreciate it. It was nice meeting you.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to talk about your second book coming up when you get a publisher.
100%.
And we'll talk about that too.
Absolutely.
All right. Good luck. Thanks again.
Thank you.